Okay, dear ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and partners, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this online conference called Post-COVID Globalization Trends that is organized by the Economic Research Institute. Just for your information, we are also broadcasting this meeting at YouTube at the page of our institute and also at Facebook. The world population approaching 8 billion inhabitants has seen some of the advantages as well as the challenges and the disadvantages of multilateral global economy. Having said so, the coronavirus pandemic has wreaked havoc global economies. Stemming the tide has severely impacted all countries around the world, even though within different magnitudes. The volume of global goods export in 2020 could fall to a level last seen in the 2000s, according to the latest WTO forecast. That would be a tremendously painful drop, especially in the context of today's larger and more complex world economy. The outbreak of COVID-19 has demonstrated the wide-ranging and immediate impact. The longer-term impacts are still being realized and depend heavily on the ability of the governments to respond effectively to the direct economic shock caused by the pandemic. This pandemic has placed unprecedented burden on the world's economy, healthcare, and globalization through the travel and events cancellations, employment workforce, food change, academia, and healthcare capacity. In this webinar, our panelists will discuss the possible consequences of the current global crisis to global economy. But before we begin, ladies and gentlemen and our guests, let me briefly tell you about the Economic Research Institute activities, which is the state leading institution under the Ministry of National Economy of Kazakhstan, founded in 1961. Economic Research Institute is aimed at providing scientific support for the country's economic strategy implementation, analyzing state economy and the forecasting of its future development, promoting of sustainable economic growth, improving of the level and the quality of people's life. We are actively involved in development process of the most important state programs and in assessing of the country's economic situation. Particular attention is paid to strategic documents, monitoring and revising, as well as to applied scientific research in the field of economics based on the use of modern economic and mathematical models. Thus, it is quite crucial for us to find the comprehensive solutions and present it to the government. Dear colleagues, first of all, let me give a gratitude to our guests and my honor to present to you the following speakers: Dr. Dolores Tulebekova, Director of Center of Economic Research Institute; Professor Jan van Zwetten, Rector of Netherlands Business Academy; Dr. Fatih Akbulut, Associate Professor at Kocaeli University in Turkey; and Dr. Adam Suchetsky, Lecturer at University of Lodz in Poland. I would like to note that two more speakers are joining us later on, as I would like to say to you that, geographically we are covering now the United States and the Europe mainly, and the two of them will join us later, and I will introduce to you them properly later on. And also I have a proposal that the questions and answer sessions will be after all speakers have made their presentations. Let me also welcome here our experts from the Economic Research Institute that are joining us. And the first speaker is Dr. Dolores Tulebekova. She did her PhD at Warsaw State University. Since 2007, has an experience at Ministry of Transport. Then she joined the Ministry of Investment of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Continued at the National Chamber of Entrepreneurs of Kazakhstan, called Atamiken. And today she is the director of the Center at the Economic Research Institute. It is my pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Dolores with the speech entitled Pandemic Crisis and the Challenges in International Trade. Dr. Dolores, the floor is yours, please.
Dear colleagues, I'm glad to welcome you to the conference organized by our Economic Research Institute. Prominent scientists and experts from Turkey, Poland, the Netherlands, and the USA will take part in the discussion today. And I would like to thank you for your participation in the conference and the opportunity to share points. The topic that we would like to discuss today is extremely interesting, important, and sensitive. As everyone knows, globalization of the economy is a complex and contradictory process. On the one hand, it facilitates economic cooperation between states, creates conditions for countries to access to advanced achievements of humanity, enjoys resources savings, and stimulates world progress. On the other hand, globalization leads to negative consequences: the consolidation of the peripheral economic model, the loss of their resources by countries not included in the golden billion, the smash up of small business, the spread of globalization's competition to the weak countries, and the fall of living standards. According to the World Trade Organization, from 1950 to 2000, world trade increased 20 times, while production only 6 times. That is, the volume of world trade is growing many times faster than the level of production. In the context of globalization, regionalization processes began to develop in order to join the world trade relations. It is the last 30 years that the rapid growth of integration groupings has been observed. Most of the integration associations adhere to a policy of open regionalism. On the other hand, this tendency may change in the face of changing conditions. For example, as shown in the slide, the economic crisis of 1975, energy crisis in 1980, the 2008 world economic crisis, and nowadays pandemic. All this leads to decreasing of GDP. Next slide, please. According to the UNCTAD, the United Nations World Investment Report, the COVID-19 crisis will cause a sharp decline of foreign direct investment. Global FDI inflows are forecasted to decline by up to 40% in this year, compared with the previous year level of $1.54 trillion. You can see it on that. FDI is forecasted to decline another 5–10% in next year and begin to recover in 2022. In particular, in the first half of this year, in our country, FDI fell by 35%. However, the experience of this year showed that at the time of the global crisis, in the face of the pandemic, neither the effects of regionalism nor the globalization cannot provide adequate support for world development. During the period of top negative effects of the pandemic, many countries have restricted the export of key essential goods to struggle against the pandemic COVID-19. In this case, the same countries have opened imports for medicine, medical products, alcohol beverages, and other food production. For instance, within the framework of Eurasian Union, import duties on medical devices, medicine, as well as a number of food products were temporarily cancelled. The ban of mask exports and number of food products. The European Union has provided for a permissive procedure for the export of personal protective gear, import taxes, and a lot of the goods necessary to struggle against consequences of the pandemic COVID-19's extent. Next slide, please. In principle, having studied international experience, we can say that all taken measures and the consequences of the pandemic had similar consequences for most countries of the world. So, as a result of COVID-19, there are following consequences in the European and Central Asia region. 4.7% decline in economic growth in 2017, after which the region's economy will start to grow again in next year, thanks to policy measures, a rebound in global commodity prices, and rebound in trade. Decline in social and economic activity, large-scale disruption in global and regional value chains, reduced travel and tourism, decrease of demand for export products. Next slide, please. As for the foreign trade of Kazakhstan in January-August 2020, Kazakhstan's foreign trade turnover amounts to $55.6 billion. You can see it on the screen. Compared to the same period last year, the figure decreased by $7.5 billion or 12%. It should be noted that the trade turnover of Kazakhstan for 8 months this year is down with all regional groupings except Asia. Exports for this period decreased by 16% compared to the previous year. Imports decreased by 6%. In general, during the period from March to August, during the quarantine period, Kazakhstan lost about $8.5 billion from the export of Kazakhstan's goods. The theater prospects of international trade also remain unpredictable due to a possible increase in the incidence of coronavirus around the world. The recovery of economic growth will largely depend on the effectiveness of the economic policies of states. But in the event of a protracted recession, investment activity will continue to be depressed, which, among other things, will indicate the continued weakness of external demand. In my opinion, there are several scenarios for development of the world economy. Firstly, autarkic, what means transition to the possibility of self-sufficiency and import substitution. But in this case, the experience of the countries of Latin America is necessary to recall, as in the case of Kazakhstan, are characterized by a raw material orientation of production. Import substitution had many benefits for the economies of developing countries and the initial stage of industrial development, when consumer goods were being replaced. It made it possible to achieve self-sufficiency in a wide range of consumer goods, create a sufficiently diversified manufacturing industry, change the sectoral structure of the economy, increase the qualifications of the local labor force, and so on. Subsequently, the policy of import substitution began to create serious problems for the economies of those countries that followed it for a long time. As world experience shows, import substitution gives a positive effect in the initial period of implementation, but then its negative effects appear. Currently, the prevailing point of view in world economic science is that this strategy has not always made it possible to overcome the economic backwardness of developing countries through stable economic growth. In theory, the import substitution model was supposed to give the development of a self-sufficient, diversified economy using modern technologies. However, as practice shows, only imports of consumer goods are seriously decreasing, while imports of manufactured goods, on the contrary, are growing. But the most serious problem is that the industries being created couldn't withstand competition in the world market, since they were in greenhouse conditions and got used to them. Only a few developing countries have actually managed to climb sharply up the income scale, but these countries have never followed the import substitution model or moved away from it in the beginning. The second option for the development of cooperation in the framework of international trade is a revision of the mechanisms of the function of the existing integrational platforms. In the post-COVID period, countries are already beginning to gradually rebuild their economies, including through the resumption of trade ties. It should be noted that integration associations are also returning to the established forms of cooperation, now taking joint measures. At the same time, it's feeling that in the event occurrence from the Black Swan series, the state is doomed to independently cope with the economic crisis remains. That is, integration processes will take place, since world economic ties have existed from the time immemorial and are so strong that breaking them, countries will be doomed to economic isolation. However, they will proceed at slower speed and with more caution. The trend towards self-sufficiency of the country, in turn, should be directed towards export orientation in framework new trend globalism. It's all. Thank you very much for attention, and I wish to successful conference and discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Dolores. This is, I guess, the exact point why the globalization trends are, in the top priority of the agenda of many countries, being, self-isolated, lockdowns due to the coronavirus, causes, really headaches to the governments, whereas to find out the solutions to, strengthen the trade cooperation between, having in mind that the, multinational agreements also have in place for many countries. But, as I mentioned before, we come back to the discussions later on, just to highlight Dr. Dolores' speech, very comprehensive, very detailed data provided. Thank you again. The next speaker is Professor Jan van Zwetten, who has studied at Royal Military Academy, Finance and Economics, also has deep knowledge of information management and technology and accountancy. Since 1998, he is the rector of Netherlands Business Academy, also coordinates as General Director Dutch Management Institute, Director Mentally Fit Institute, and the Dutch Institute for Health and Performance, and also he is the Director of Intercultural Academy. Professor Zwetten will give a speech about the paradox, the downfall of multinationals due to globalization. Professor, please.
I will try to share the screen. Is it clear?
Yes, it is indeed.
Okay. Then let me start, and thank you for the invitation.
Sorry, Professor Zwetten, just a moment of you, just to check with our other participants. I have received a note that some of them having trouble with viewing the presentations. Colleagues, could you just inform that everything is okay and you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see the presentation. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, sounds perfect. Professor Zwetten, sorry for disturbing you.
No. It will be more interesting than my presentation, for sure. Well, we always try to go back in the past to try to prove our point. So we'll take you back sometime. In the first place, I would like to bring back in memory is this nice building. It's not an Astana building, they already decided. This is a building in 2001 of Enron, one of the biggest companies in the United States at that moment, and we all know what happened to Enron. And because of globalization, this was not the only thing that happened with the frauds. Even in Holland, we suffered in our biggest companies, ABN Bank, Albert Heijn, we suffered from fraud and mismanagement. So what is normally the reaction of the government to this? They always jump in, they rescue financially. So even ABN Bank was completely Dutch government taken over, and they increase control. But it's never possible for the government to rescue all and to solve all problems. So also we see something changing in business. And after all the leadership styles we had, we now experienced a new leadership style, authentic leadership, which is clearly more to the basics, more to the sense of things. In business, we always say, think big, start small. But in this case, I would turn it around and I would say, start small, think big. Because, can you remember this? 2008, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. What came out of it? the downfall of two of the biggest United States companies. And what was the consequence? Banking crisis, going worldwide, in all the countries, banks falling down, recession. And what was the answer of the governments? Financial rescue, increase of control, but still they cannot solve all the problems. So again, think big, start small. Something happened in China. We are still not clear exactly what, but let's say it was something like this. And what happens? Globalization and corona crisis worldwide. So what is the answer to the situation? Everywhere, government jumps in, financial rescue. In Holland, we already spent 76 billion euros with only 70 million people living in Holland. And we spent 76 billion euros to save all the companies and to make sure people do not lose their jobs. And it works. Nobody lost their job. All companies survive. But of course, we got a lot of increase of control. But how long can we do this? How many crises can we survive? How often can we spend so much money on solving such a crisis? So, in my opinion, leadership shows us where it goes to. We now have, in the last, let's say, 8 years, shared leadership, open leadership, joint accountability, situational responsibility. What does it mean? In my opinion, multinationals are too big and even too important for society. If they fall down, we have to rescue them. They're not flexible enough. If there's a crisis, they have a real big problem. There's not enough innovation. They're only focusing on day-to-day stock value, and they're not flexible in times of crisis. So what is the answer of the business world? Everything is going to network organizations. Changing networks of autonomous companies working together on big projects, each time in different groups. Is this a strange development? I think it's necessary. We now have Corona, but there's so much more coming up. In Holland now, the aging is a huge, huge problem. Pollution everywhere, overpopulation, climate change, resources. And what about this? Can we control it? Is it possible to control the world, the crisis, economics, or even just one market? Is centralization the solution to this, or adaptation of smaller entities? We all once started like this. Families and tribes hunting together, making sure they get food together. Then we grouped villages, cities, and we made specializations, but always small firms. Then it got bigger, countries, industrial revolution, and now we even go to globalization and multinationals. So what's the next step? To my opinion, it was this, and in business, we went on to the industrial revolution and to the multinationals, but now it goes back and the circle goes more or less round. So to my opinion, it goes to a network of individuals, and a network is also meaning a lot of groups of individuals, each time different sizes, different groups. And this makes the circle round. And this means that all these crises can only lead to one thing: smaller units and the downfall of multinationals. And we already see in Holland now that the big companies are having the problems, the smaller companies are benefiting of the crisis. These were my words. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Nurbek, we can't hear you.
Thank you, Madina. Thank you, Professor Zweten. I believe that is exactly what we are going to discuss, the pros and cons. And you have shown, this is precisely what has been going on, and reminded me the book of writer Dr. Harari of Homo sapiens, the development of our nations. And, these questions are actually looking forward to finding the solutions, because on that, the future is, dependent. Our children, grandchildren, the future of our population. But again, this is a little summary from my point of view. We're going to come back to this on the open discussion session. And my pleasure to introduce to you just briefly Mr. John Perkins, who just joined us. I just, told you that more speakers. Mr. Perkins, welcome. Mr. Perkins, can you hear us?
Good morning.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Yes, indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm a little late because I think we had the time zones wrong. It's just a little after 7 a.m. here, and I thought the show was beginning at 8 a.m. So I apologize for being a little bit late, but here I am, and I'm about to make a cup of coffee.
That's perfectly fine, especially, after the elections story ended up quite recently. I believe that you're getting now some sleeps. Just, let me stick to the agenda then. Our next speaker is Dr. Fatih Akbulut, who works at the Department of Public Administration at the Kocaeli University in Turkey. He conducts research and lectures in the fields of regional development and urbanization. Completed his master's degree at the University of Exeter in the UK, and completed his PhD studies in Ankara University in 2010. He has worked as a district governor in various provinces in Turkey and served as department director at Kocaeli Metropolitan Municipality University, and served as a general secretary of the East Marmara Regional Development Agency, and also worked as the general secretary at the Kocaeli University from 2015 and 2019, and still continues his academic studies at his university. Dr. Fatih will deliver a speech about the globalization and regional development policies. Please, Dr. Akbulut, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nurbek Yakeshbayev. I am very pleased to be here with you today, and thanks a lot, Madame Dolores, for organizing and inviting me to this event. My area of study is not so quickly a remedy for the current economic problems and post-COVID problems of the world and of the regions, because regional development takes some time. So I will briefly give you an impression, an insight about the regional development policies, and continue with the Turkish examples and European Union examples. The regional development has gained importance after the Second World War in order to reconstruct the countries, especially in the Europe. And during this time, the academic research and professional experience has gained more importance on regional development policies starting from 1950s to 1980s. But with the 1980s, the neoliberalist approach to economy has sidelined the plan-based development approaches. But with this area, the free movement of goods, services, and capital has gained importance. We name this period as globalization, and it's still dominant all over the world. And for the last 20 years, the free movement of information also has been added to these three factors moving freely all over the world. Now, big data, automation, and smart systems has become dominant factors over the past decade. Now, the perception of development and perception of regional development needs to be reconsidered based on these new developments. And coronavirus problem has also showed us that the world is moving towards a more information technologies oriented economy and social life in the future. All possible services are being transferred into IT-based systems, online systems, automated systems all over the world. Even the factories, even the production plants are being transferred into less labor-dependent, more automated online systems. Now we are talking about Industry 4.0. And it is not possible for all the production systems, but it is possible for mass production. And also, after the coronavirus, we well know that the importance of logistics has gained more importance. Logistics and IT-based services are being dominated all over the world now. People now don't want to live in the big metropolitan, densely populated metropolitan areas. They want to move towards less densely suburban areas for health reasons. Instead of mostly densely urbanized populated areas, people are looking for a life in less urbanized areas. We can call it garden cities, a very well-known perception by the urban scientists. The business environment is also being transferred into more flexible and, if it's possible, home office style. On the one hand, we are witnessing a transfer from densely populated, densely urbanized areas towards less densely populated, less densely urbanized areas. On the other hand, in the post-coronavirus period, there is a need to restructure, there is a need to reconstruct the national economies and regional economies, which are badly affected by the economic problems during the coronavirus period. First of all, the supply chain has been disrupted all over the world, even in the countries over the past few months. In order to overcome these problems, these kind of problems, there is a need to reconstruct, redesign the national economies and the supply chains, just like post-war area. But after the Second World War, it was based on construction business. It was based on more concrete infrastructures. Now it is need to be around more IT-based information technologies oriented directions. And health sector also has showed its importance, and I'm sure within the following decades we will witness more research and business attempts on this area also. Regions in the national boundary, in national borders, needs to adopt innovation-based R&D based development approach. In order to create this kind of research-based, innovation-oriented development, regions need to adopt learning infrastructures for the people living in the region and for the people living in the cities in their regions. Therefore, it will create a more habitable, a better environment, a better social and physical infrastructure for the people living in the region, which will attract more people to the region and more financial resources as well. And in order to reach this goal, a better habitable environment, a better habitable region, regions need to adopt and implement some new structures. But contrary to the regional development structures during the 1950s, 1960s, which are from top to bottom structures, management structures, today's regional development approach should be more participatory, from more network-based, more transparent, more accountable, more bottom-to-up structures. We call it more governance-oriented approaches. Of course, there will be still need for planning, for regional planning, which is always considered by affiliated by the central government organizations, but we need to know where we are going. Regions need to have a plan, but it should be created more participatory processes. And this kind of organizations has started to emerge within the past few decades in Europe and in other regions of the world, and also in Turkey. May I share my slide?
Yes, please.
As I mentioned, regional development has to ensure growth and stability and balance the equalization problems in the region and between the regions in the country. And in order to reach these goals, regional development policies use some tools. First of all, and the most important one, I think, is the regional planning. The plans can be prepared for regional for the metropolitan areas, for rich resource regions, or for the poor regions. And public investments are other tools: public investments, public incentives, infrastructure investments, creation of administrative organizations, financial and tax incentives and regulations, and promotion of other entrepreneurship activities are among the other policy tools used by the regional development policies. I would like to give you an example from the region, East Marmara region from Turkey. The region adopts three-pillar approach to reach its goals. In the center, it has to create a more competitive region through smart specialization, increasing value added for products and services produced in region, and facilitation of a business environment in the region. In order to create and promote this business environment, the region adopts a few approaches to improve the capabilities of the people living in the region, and to promote a better and more qualified labor force to the economy and improve the social solidarity. And of course, more economically sustainable environment is inevitable for the region, and social cohesion and solidarity is also inevitable for the success of the plan. This is basically a classical sustainable development type of approach adopted and applied to the regional level. And the European Union, as I mentioned earlier, has a kind of statistical system which is also adopted by Turkey. All of the European Union member states have this statistical regional system through which the European Union funds are channeled to the member states and candidate member states, and of course to the regions in the European Union area. Currently, there are 281 regions at the NUTS 2 level. There are 3. This is the second level I'm mentioning now. And financial resources, it's important for the European Union, the allocation of the funds to the regions in order to eliminate the imbalance problems both in the national boundaries and among the nations in the Union. As you can see, for the 7-year period, there are 350 billion euros allocated for the regional development and cohesion policy in the European Union. And Poland seems to be the highest beneficiary of these funds. European model adopts the coordination of state, market, and civil society, and it adopts and Turkey follows the example. Its example to create development agencies to use and facilitate regional development funds in the regions. The blue dots on the map shows many of the development agencies that uses this fund in the European Union, and some of the websites from Italy, from Greece. And this is the Turkey's regional development infrastructure. These are the institutions, agencies all over Turkey. Turkey has 26 regions based on European Union models. These regions are not administrative regions. These regions are statistically created regions to facilitate business and funding of the projects all over the Turkey. As an example, to improve the development projects and to strengthen the capacity of the region, many of the regions in Europe and Turkey also prepare regional innovation strategies for smart specialization. Smart specialization and innovation strategies are strongly supported by the European Union in order to create more competitive country, more competitive region, more competitive companies, both domestic and at the regional level and at the global level. Smart specialized strategic innovation, regional innovation ecosystem is being intended to create by these kind of strategies. And this is the East Marmara innovation ecosystem. Each of the actors that contribute to the competitiveness and innovation, more innovation-based economy in the region, from government agencies to universities to civil society and financial institutions and research and development institutions are all described, and industrial zones and technoparks also are taking place in this ecosystem. And clusters are the other important channels through which the regional economy develops and improves its innovative capacity. The region that I mentioned, East Marmara, has strongly been supporting clusters in this region. The first few of them are chemical cluster, machinery cluster, automotive, iron and steel, metal products, logistics, and electrical machinery products. The region that this region is the most heavily industrialized region of Turkey. That's why these industries, all heavy industries, are accumulated in this region. Thank you very much. This is the example from Turkey, through which the country needs to intends to increase its competitiveness, intends to improve its regional learning infrastructure in order to create more habitable, in order to create a better social and learning environment. Thank you.
Dr. Akbulut, thank you very much indeed. This is, again, finding out why we are organizing this event. Regional development, in my opinion, another great tool in order to strengthen the economy policy, to recover, especially after crisis, after the current crisis as well. And as Professor Zveten mentioned before, globalization has the some disadvantages, whereas we have to put more attention perhaps by using this crisis for more regional development. And Turkey is a great, I believe, example of developing towards this policy. And I might have already some questions to you, Dr. Akbulut, but let's get it on the open discussion session.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again. Now let me introduce to you Dr. Adam Suchetsky. Since 2009, he works as chair of public finance in the Faculty of Economy and Sociology of University of Lodz. Areas of scientific interests are public finance, cultural economics, public finance efficiency, local government policies, cultural policies. He's the author of many book chapters and articles published in scientific and professional journals. Dr. Suchetsky will share his thoughts on EU policy against COVID-19 and the situation of public cultural institutions in Poland during the pandemic. Dr. Suchetsky, the floor is yours, please. Dr. Suchetsky, could you hear me? I think he has some urgent, perhaps, matters or failed with the connections. Could you bear with me a couple of minutes? We could get in touch with him. For an hour or so, he was with us. Just before his speech just disappeared. Huh? Preparing his presentation then. Dr. Suchetsky? Here it is, the presentation. Dr. Suchetsky?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's perfect now. We can see the presentation as well.
You can see the presentation. Okay, so it's perfect. I just
Sorry, we lost you for a bit.
Also, so sorry for that.
That's perfectly fine. Please, the floor is yours, Dr. Sohti.
Okay, so I would like to introduce you some European anti-COVID policy according to the situation of Poland and the Polish public cultural institutions. I just tried to find my presentation here, but okay, so you can see the presentation. Okay, it's still not working, but okay, I will just say a few words about the situation of Poland while the presentation is loading. Okay, in Poland, be the one of the quite stable economy in the European Union and in the region of the Central and Eastern Europe. And the GDP was on the growth of the GDP was pretty good. It was something about 2% per year, but it started slowing down in the few years ago. But in this year, after the epidemic break out, it's going suddenly. It goes suddenly down. The growth rate is minus 8.9%, something about 8%. So the decrease of the GDP is huge. And the next slide. Okay.
Mr. Suchetsky,
Yes.
pardon me, please, but could you press the F5 button?
F5. Okay, no problem. And while the presentation is loading, I just continue. And in Poland, yes.
Please go on. Please go on.
Okay. In Poland, we just have a lot of problems with the not only the economy, but also with the culture, and the cultural institutions are nowadays in big troubles because almost all of them were shut down during the pandemic, and most of them are the public institutions, mostly run by the self-government units. Okay, we've got the presentation. I hope it will works.
Dr. Sukhetsky,
and the problem is that, yes.
Sorry for disturbing you. Just in order to, listen or see your proper presentation, can we take perhaps a couple of minutes break so we can assist you with finding the solution to this issue?
Okay, but can you see the presentation
now it's working.
now?
Yeah. Can you slide?
Okay, so probably it will work. Yeah. Okay, it works, I think.
Yeah, it is now.
Okay. So here we can see the gross domestic product volume growth rate, and we can see this horrible decrease of the gross domestic product in Poland. This chart is pretty cool because and horrifying, of course, because we can see the consumption expenditures and the gross fixed capital formations and the gross domestic product, and we can see all of these factors are going down suddenly in 2020. So. And the cultural institutions in Poland are mostly the public institutions. The private institutions, the cultural institutions, the few cultural institutions in Poland don't work at all nowadays. Probably it will be shut down totally. And in Poland, in the past, we transformed the system of financing of culture, and most of those cultural public institutions have own revenues, so they have to work for the revenues, and the rest amount of news were subsidized. So to reduce the subsidies, we just the institutions were supposed to be more economical effective. And nowadays, most of these institutions can't be economical effective because they can't work properly. They are shut down. In a few months ago, the work of these institutions were limited, and nowadays it's shut it down. Okay, let's see the map. Okay, here we have the map of Poland, and we can see here the structure of cultural institutions according to the scale of the decline in revenues from economic activity in the first and the second quarter of 2020. And what we can see here, we can see the regions, the deep blue color. We can see the regions where the decrease in revenues are at the level above 90%. So in most of these regions, a lot of institutions just lost the revenues, and actually the Polish government don't have any remedy for this situation, and probably we have to wait a little bit for the situation change. But what about the European Union? The European Union reinforced the EU countries to rebuild themselves from the after the pandemic, and the European economy used to be based on the creative factor. We should be considered as the creative economy, and a lot of countries in Europe make a huge efforts to achieve the status of the creative economies and spend a lot of public money to be considered as a creative economy. And here we have the three segments of the European Union budget, and the second one is the new component, the Next Generation EU, which should be the main source of the money in European Union after the COVID. And here we have three branches of the European Union policy. First one is the supporting member states to recover. Second is the kick-starting the economy and helping private investment, and learning the lessons from the crisis. And what is the role of the cultural institutions in all of this anti-COVID policy of European Union? In Poland, we do a lot to digitalize the culture. So some of cultural institutions have a great experience in the new situations, the digital situations. We have digital theaters, digital access to the museums and archives, but it is not enough. And the interesting role of the European Union will be the kick-starting the economy and helping private investment. And they will support key sectors and technologies and investing in key value change, and also transist the role of the economy, transist the form of the economy and the industry to be more digitalized. So probably to improve the private investment, to help to support the investment, the culture should play one of the main role, because the cultural institutions have impact of the regional attractiveness for the investments, especially the foreign investments. But nowadays, and in the most of the European countries, the cultural institutions are in big troubles. So also the European Union have a new, more flexible emergency tools. Actually, they are not new, but the European policy make it more flexible. It's a Solidarity and Emergency Aid Reserve and Solidarity Fund, and also European Globalization Adjustment Fund. And I hope the money that we received from the European Union, all the European Union countries will receive soon, will help us to rebuild the common world, the European world after the pandemic. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Husecki.
Thank you.
Very informative. I think, we are following the agenda. Now we looked at the country's case, and I believe that, this is the issue that many countries are talking about, whereas the unions or the, organizations that are foresee the countries inside, whether they are efficient or not. And the drop of GDP after the COVID-19 has been in place, I think it's quite, considerable. And this is something, we have to discuss and find out what would be the best scenario for further development. Thank you again, Mr. Sukhetsky.
Thank you.
And now my great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. John Perkins. As we'll try to explain who he is, but we'll try at least. He is the chief economist at a major international consulting firm. He advised the World Bank, United Nations, IMF, US Treasury Department, Fortune 400 corporations, and also countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Middle East. He worked directly with heads of states and the CEOs of major companies. His books, would like to highlight here, have sold more than 2 million copies, spent many months on the New York Times and other bestsellers list. Let me give you some examples. This is the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, 73 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Over 305 languages has been translated, along with the book called The Secret History of the American Empire, New York Times bestseller. Mr. Perkins has lectured at Harvard, Oxford, and more than 50 other universities around the world. In addition to economics, politics, and global intrigue, he has written books on indigenous cultures and the transformation. He has been featured on ABC, NBC, CNN, Time, the New York Times, the Washington, and the others publications. And now his speech will be about the question, will the pandemic transform the global death to a life economy? Mr. Perkins, the floor is yours, please.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating experience we're going through. I really, really appreciate everybody I've heard so far and the opportunity to be here with you. I'm sitting on the west coast of the United States right now in the state of Washington, near Seattle. As the world knows, my country is going through, in addition to being the hardest hit by the pandemic, we've been the least successful, I think, at combating the pandemic. We also have proven ourselves to be anything but a true democracy. I hate to say that, but that's the case. And as I spoke at the Kazakhstan Economic Summit and St. Petersburg Economic Summit a couple of years ago, I really came to understand how most of the world doesn't necessarily want to have a democracy. Most of the world hasn't had many democracies or any. And in the United States, we're brought up to believe that everybody wants democracy. I think that what we've seen in recent times, that if the United States is an example of democracy, who would want one? Because we're dysfunctional at this point. We've shown that. And we've also shown that although we may be the largest economy in the world, we have done this by creating what many economists today are referring to as a death economy. And that's an economic system that in essence is consuming itself into extinction. It's based on a single premise, and that is that the goal of business is to maximize short-term profits regardless of the environmental and social costs. That's a very lousy goal. And when you look at human beings throughout most of our 250,000 years of history, we've not had that goal for most of that time. The goal has always been to help future generations, to leave our children and grandchildren a world as good as or better than the one we inherited. But in recent times, this death economy has set itself as a goal of short-term profits. It's not even the quarterly corporate report anymore. It's the daily stock market here in the United States. That's all we care about. And it's about doing whatever it takes to create that situation. It's about destroying competition or buying out competition, creating these huge corporations that have so much power. And this is really a situation that's creating all the problems that we have today in the world. The global crisis, climate crisis. We know the glaciers are melting. We know the oceans are rising. We know we've got a climate crisis. We know we've got terrible income inequality crises. We know we've got great poverty around the world. And the pandemic, All of these things are directly or somewhat indirectly related to this idea of short-term profit growth. And this is an idea that was developing over several hundreds of years, actually, but it really took off in 1976 when Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in Economics. And although it had been developing, and von Heineken, who won the Nobel Prize a couple of years earlier, had proposed something similar, Friedman was extremely powerful in the world of economics. He had the ear of President Reagan and Thatcher and many people around the world, Poland, he was at many, many different places. And his most important statement was probably that the only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term shareholder profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. It's a terrible goal, and we have to change it. So I think we need to look at what does a life economy look like? Well, the life economy starts with the premise, the goal, that the goal of business and everyone else is to maximize long-term benefits for people and the world. And it's an economic system that pays people, that hires people and pays investors to invest in things that clean up pollution, that mine all the plastic that's out in the oceans today, and so on and so forth, that regenerate destroyed environments, that recycle, that create new technologies. Many of the things we've heard about this morning, the whole internet age, the age of high technology, that can be truly a part of the life economy. I think we've been moving into that life economy. Before the pandemic, we were moving there. Here in the United States, and I think much of the world, we're looking at ideas like green GDP, not just GDP, but green GDP, B corporations, benefit corporations, conscious capitalism. These are things that were evolving. And the pandemic has shown us that we must move in this direction. In the past, we've been affected by crises, hurricanes and tidal waves and fires and so on, but people looked at these as local. If I survived a serious hurricane, I expected the outside world to come to my help eventually, maybe in a few days, maybe a few weeks, bring me water, food. But the pandemic is that's not going to happen. There's no outside world. The pandemic has hit every living creature on this planet, every one of them. And so it sent us this very strong message that we must change. We must move from this economic system that's based on short-term profit maximization, short-term materialistic consumption, to one that's based on long-term. And I'd like to comment on a couple of things. So we've heard in some of these talks about the need for growth. Well, we have to define what growth is. If what we're talking about is growth in more stuff, more materialistic things that are just ravaging the earth and don't really serve a purpose, we can't afford that anymore. If we're talking about growth in cleaning up the environment and creating technologies and businesses that do mine the plastic in the oceans and all the oil that's leaked around gas stations around the world and oil drilling sites, and if we're talking about growth in businesses that regenerate destroyed environments, that replant trees where forests have been destroyed, that fill in old mines and move us away from digging up the earth and ravaging it, that's the kind of growth we need. We need growth in the arts. We need growth in spirituality. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about going deep within ourselves, which is another modern movement. And that's been growing, at least in my country, through this pandemic, where people are really doing a lot more meditation, and they're doing it by the internet and so forth. There's a lot of areas for growth, but what we don't need is growth in the old methods, the old systems, which ravage the earth, which destroy the future for my grandson and every child on this planet. So we need to move in that direction. And, I'd like to say a word about GDP. We hear a lot of this today, and it was my job as chief economist was to grow GDP in the countries that I was advising. But I came to understand that GDP is a very, very poor measure of prosperity. It only measures the prosperity of the rich people. It does not measure overall prosperity like I was taught to believe it did in business school and like the World Bank wants us to believe. So here's an example. In the United States, 3 individuals have as much wealth as half the United States population. You can do a back of the envelope calculation. If those 3 individuals made 10% return on their assets last year, and half the United States lost 3%, we'd show a GDP growth of something around 3.5%. We'd show a growth in GDP, even though half the country was doing worse. And so we need to develop new forms of measurement, ones that take into account the long term, our own sustainability. And I think the message of the coronavirus, this pandemic, should be that we can move into these new technologies. We can change. We've made huge changes in the past, during the past months during this pandemic. We've made. The seminar we're having now. I'm not in Kazakhstan. I'm not in Russia. None of us, I don't think any of us are sitting in the same room together. We're coming from Turkey and Poland and the United States and Kazakhstan and all over. It's magnificent. Will we ever go back to the old ways? Well, I hope once in a while we will get to meet each other personally. But we've come to understand that that's not necessary, and it's often very inefficient. We have seen that there'll be whole new sectors of the economy developing, as we heard on an earlier talk this morning here. And so we've seen that we can move, we can change radically. So let's really change now. Let's commit to moving into a new economic system that's very exciting, that provides full employment for people, but full employment for people doing things that make a better long-term future. And I'd also like to comment on something else that I see happening, and that is that the West, and especially the United States, is absolutely in decline. There's no question about it. And the East is on the rise. China is leading the New Silk Road. I traveled around a lot of the countries in the last few years that are part of the New Silk Road. And also to Latin America. I spent a lot of time in Latin America. I'm headed there in a couple of months, if the virus doesn't pick up too much. And the Belt and Road Initiative, the road part of that is reaching across the seas. It's in Latin America. China, in every way, is beating out the United States in Latin America. The Latin Americans have seen that they've been exploited by the United States, people like the economic hitman. And China has a policy of not interfering with politics. Now that may just be wordsmithing, I don't know. But what I do know, I don't know what the sincerity, but what I do know is that there's a radical shift in the balance of power on our planet. And I think we need to recognize that. And I think you who are involved in shaping economic policy must really try very hard to understand that this shift in power is going on. And at the same time, we must encourage the countries that are on the rise to move into a life economy. One of the reasons that the United States is on the decline is because it's been so dedicated to maximizing short-term profits, to Wall Street, to making huge profits for a very small number of people, really. And that's proven to be a big mistake. So as we move forward, and as the balance of economic power shifts from one country to another, from one region to another, let's really focus on making sure that we create an economic system that's very different from the one that we've been living under during all of my lifetime. I was born at the end of World War II. I've seen a death economy. I've seen the benefits of it, and had created tremendous benefits for many years. The technology that we have today, we wouldn't have without that death economy. It's created amazing advances in medicine and the sciences and the arts and technology and all kinds of technology, but it's reached its limit. Everything has limits, and we've reached the limit. I would just end with one other thought here, and that is that back in 1914, Henry Ford said, if I ask the people what they want, they would say faster horses. But Ford said, I know the world doesn't need faster horses. The world is dying from horse pollution. And the fact of the matter was, all the big cities of the world were smothering under horse manure. They were filled with horse manure. And all the fields, all the lands around major cities were devoted to feeding horses. And so Ford said, the solution to pollution is the automobile. And he was right. It was for a long time, but it isn't anymore. And I think that, the lesson there is that we need to be flexible. The great minds that are on this program together today, and all of you, the networks each one of you has, which is also filled with great minds, we need to come together and understand that we mustn't try to go back to the old normal, the death economy. It's time now to move forward with great strength, with great creativity, with great inspiration and dedication to a new type of economy, a life economy. And this is an economic system that our children and our grandchildren will thank us for. They'll look back at this time and say, thank heaven those people came together back in 2020 and opened their eyes and got 2020 vision and saw that the course they were on was a self-destructive course, and they committed to moving forward into a new course. I think this is such a very, very exciting time to be alive. I think this is such an exciting time to be in the position that everybody on this program is in. We're all in different positions, but every one of us has the ability to influence economic policy and the world, the way the world moves. And so I think we should all feel very, very blessed to be at this time and be take a great deal of responsibility and be totally committed to moving forward into a new type of economic growth and development. Thank you very much. I really appreciate being on this show. It's a great group of people. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Perkins. Quite emotional, very kind of, driven speech. And once in the beginning you mentioned about democracy, I just reminded myself the speech of Winston Churchill, Sir Winston Churchill, back in 1947, when he said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all others. And you see, for the time being, for some people, it is understood that this is the best form of the government. But, in the future, the history will show or will tell us, whether it was the right direction or wrong one.
Well, if I could just add to that. So it so much depends on the individual in charge, whether it's an autocracy or whether it's it's a dictatorship or a democracy. It all depends on the perfect person in charge. And that's what we've got to look at, is how do we create systems that'll make sure we get people in charge that'll take care of the future.
I think this is the core question of our discussions of our today's agenda. What would be the best or a good kind of scenario or system that would lead us for development?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much again, Mr. Perkins. We'll come back to this issue just later on. Let me just go through our speakers' speeches. First with Dr. Dolores one, who started with the challenges in international trade. We saw the pros and cons, where it is leading now, some of the points related to the WTO role, which is now being discussed quite widely, whether it needs the reforms or not. And then we had Professor Zwetten, who just, quite in details explained to us the perhaps downfall of multinationals due to globalization and what it led us today. And then Dr. Akbulut touched upon the regional development policies, why it should be an example of using this practice at this moment for the countries, perhaps with the similar approach to Turkey. And then we had Dr. Suchecki, who explained us about the current situation in Poland and why the policy of the unions now are kind of facing difficulties, whereas, you know, more developed countries are getting more, less, and this, you know, time should be overlooked for that approaches as well. And now we had Mr. Perkins, who just explained to us why we should, you know, look further to the future rather than going back and reassessing. Perhaps we need to find out a new way of, you know, moving towards the economic development. And now I would like to open the session for discussions. As I mentioned, we have here also our experts from our institute. Perhaps they would like to, you know, comment or ask some questions to our speakers over here. The floor is open. Okay, before, once you are, you know, perhaps after Mr. Perkins' speech, you are kind of, you know, creating your minds up to find the right question, thinking of too far future. I was just, you know, memorizing myself, going back to my master's degree, which I did in Durham University in the United Kingdom back in 2005. I was taught that the economist's way of developing is to stick to some certain rules that are not or cannot be changed. It's like, you know, too big to fail, which has been not the case in the crisis in 2008. Some economic theories that I've been taught that, you know, the crucial for the country's economies or finances, whereas, you know, close cooperation could be the key point for further, you know, strengthening the policies. And now we are facing the moment that, you know, we have to think of creating something new, something perhaps revolutionary in terms of, you know, intergovernmental cooperation, perhaps inter-firms cooperation, or perhaps between the nations. Even today we are, you know, witnessing the times that are meeting each other through Zoom or through other tools are, you know, becoming normal. I remember myself in April, I couldn't use, you know, except Skype, of course, this kind of tools and how to kind of interact with each other and to find, you know, the solutions or to exchange the files, etc. This leads us to the understanding that learning is never late, and we have to be, having said that, we have to be quite careful with the new technologies as well. As we see, you know, some of them are kind of, you know, putting ourselves in the danger zone, if I may say. Then about the, I like the point of Mr. Perkins about the measures of economies of the countries. I might agree myself that the measuring the country by GDP could not be the case these days. You know, it doesn't show the clear picture of the economy itself. For example, the USA economy, as you mentioned, or the Kazakhstan's economy as well by GDP. For example, some countries could be quite developed on R&D, but the GDP could be lower than in some of the Eastern countries that are not so developed in R&Ds. And this is going to be quite crucial point for investors or for, you know, companies that are looking forward to expanding their activities. So while I've been talking about today's agenda, anyone would like to raise the question or make a comment?
Good evening.
Yes,
Okay.
Mr. Kwanish, perhaps ladies first then?
Okay, ladies first.
Okay.
Of course.
Thank you very much. Good evening, dear colleagues. My name is Madina. I work at Economic Research Institute. Firstly, I would like to thank you all speakers for today's discussions. It is a great honor for me to participate in this conference. And yes, I absolutely agree with my colleagues, with Dr. Dolores, that globalization has pros and cons. And it is known that globalization has been one of the most hotly debated topics in international economics over the past few years. And on the one hand, it facilitates rapid growth and poverty reduction. And examples for that are China, India, and other emerging countries. And on the other hand, globalization tends to increase inequality and environmental degradation. And in this context, I have a question perhaps to Mr. Perkins, for you. How do you think how less developed countries could achieve competitive advantage when the injustice global competition for educated talent has distorted the local market? And the second one question, yeah, yes, please.
Okay, well, Medina, I mean, that's a very, very important question. And I ask it often myself, and I don't think there's any general response to that. I think there are individual responses. So if I look at my own hemisphere here, in the Caribbean, we have the country of Aruba, which has done an amazing job at creating potable water out of seawater. I mean, they've developed incredible technologies. And they've also working on technologies for storing energy. So one of the things that they have is that they will pump air when energy is cheap. They use a lot of solar and a lot of wind. So during the day, when you have solar and wind, they pump air into this huge, it's like a big flexible metal balloon that's under the ocean. And when there's no sun or no wind, the pressure of the ocean, they open a valve and the pressure of the ocean pushes the air up and it goes through turbines and creates electricity. I mean, so there's a country that's developing amazing technologies in water creation from salt water and also how to store energy. Costa Rica has done an amazing job at protecting its environment. Very different. So all different countries have different ways of moving forward. And in this era of high technology, there's so many opportunities for various countries to play some role in that. And I think one of the advantages of, if we looked at the good side of globalization, and I talk about the idea of the New Silk Road, which I would like to think of as not as a Chinese initiative, but as a potential for all of us to come together and help each country work to its greatest competitive advantage. And some countries may not have much of a competitive advantage. And then I would say it behooves all of us to help those countries take care of their people. I've spent a lot of time in indigenous communities in the Amazon and elsewhere. And one of the important aspects of those communities is that if anybody is suffering needlessly, everyone suffers. So they mean if anybody's suffering from lack of food or shelter or love, everyone's suffering. Some people will suffer because they have a disease that nobody can cure, that can't be helped. But that you take care of those who can't take care of themselves. And that may be the case with some countries. So I think this idea of globalization, and I'm not talking about one world where we all have the same culture or languages. I don't like that at all. I think it's very, very important that we each have our own, develop our own cultures and our own languages and our regional approach, like we heard earlier this morning in Turkey. But at the same time, how do we all come together to let each country develop its best competitive advantages and use those in a positive way without some other country trying to exploit it, which unfortunately is an economic hitman. That's what I did. I went to countries that had things that my country wanted, and we took them one way or another through debt, sometimes through military force. So we need to move out of that, but we need to help these countries develop and recognize that there are going to be some places and some peoples that don't have much of a competitive advantage. And so it behooves the world to take care of those people, just as we would if we were living in a tribal community in the middle of the Amazon. Because the fact of the matter is, this pandemic has taught us that we are one tribe. It doesn't matter what nationality we are, what culture, what color our skin is. None of that matters anymore. the virus doesn't give a damn. It just doesn't care. It's an amazing lesson that we hopefully we are learning. We are still in the process of learning it. So again, I would say it's hard to generalize, but we need to look at each country individually.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perkins. And my second question is, in your speech, you mentioned that GDP is not, it's a poor measure of the welfare of economy. Maybe you could give an example or alternative measure to GDP. What do you think it is the best measure to the prosperity of the country?
Yes, I think we really need to work on how we develop that, and that's not my field of expertise. But I think the idea of the triple bottom line, bringing that in, it shouldn't just be about profits. It shouldn't just be about maximizing profits. And GDP is really about maximizing the wealth of the very wealthy. That's what we measure. So we need to take into account social and environmental issues. And I think the whole idea of this idea of a happiness index, and that's
yes, exactly. I was thinking about that too.
Yeah, we need to bring, when we recognize that economics is all about people. It's not really a science at all. It's more of a sociological aspect. It's about people are the economy. And that's an aspect that we haven't brought into the measurements. The measurements have been we've tried to quantify things in terms of money. We need to look at how do we qualify things and quantify them in terms of people and people's happiness. And I think that's a very, very important one. I'm glad to see that you're looking at it. But I hope in your institution, you really dive deep into that, because man, we need people to come along and come up with some brilliant ideas that the world will accept. And that's going to be one of the biggest problems is how do we get these traditionalists to accept these things? And the pandemic ought to give us some leverage in making that happen, because what we've seen is that our current system has failed us and we need to create something new.
Yeah,
thank
you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Madina, for question. Thank you, Mr. Perkins, for great answer. Kwanish, please, your comment, your question.
Thank you, Nurbek. Good evening, dear colleagues, guests. My name is Kwanish Ilikbayev. I'm in Moscow right now. My professional interests are economic integration in trade and services, especially in the Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union. Therefore, I would be interested to ask maybe Mr. Saczewski from Poland, how he sees the development of trade and services on the European Union internal market in the post-pandemic conditions. To what extent will services become even more in demand than goods? Thank you for your answer.
Okay, let me try to answer this question. It will be hard because actually I am the cultural economist, so I am mostly focused on the culture. But probably the direction of the economy is still the same, and could you repeat your question, please? Because I just have to focus a little bit more.
I'm sorry, but maybe another speaker. My question is about trade and services, the changing of the role of trade and services of post-pandemic period. I mean, what will be the role of services? Will it be increased or decreased in comparison with trades, for example? You understand? I mean, information technologies, services like that. Thank you.
Of course, probably it will be the turn to more technological advanced services and the informatic services. I mean the external services, which are quite popular in Poland. In example, we have a lot of institutions that that serve the external services. In example, we've got the Infosys in Poland and a lot of global entities which have the centers of the external services in Poland. In example, the financial services. So probably the Europe will be, in my opinion, is just only my opinion, and as an observer of the situation, the Europe will be the center of the external services, for example, and the know-how, for example, for the Asian countries, and also we probably our model of the industry, I mean this hardcore industry, the old one, the production industry will change, and the production chains also will change. But in my opinion, all will be almost the same, because the European Union is the big market, and and we make a demand for in example, the Chinese and Asiatic markets. And without demand, there is no production and supply. So probably we have to balance the new technologies and the new reality, and the old system of the economy.
Thank you, Mr. Swetsky. If I may intervene, the answers could be also given by Professor Zwitten and Dr. Akbulut from different point of view, let's say, from the globalization of the downfall of the multinationals and from the regional point of view. What do you think, Professor Zwitten? Let me start with you.
Well, actually, we are in Holland in the center of all this because we do not have anything. We are maybe the poorest country in the world on resources, on production, on whatever. But in GDP, we are one of the richest. And happily, John, in the happiness index, we're always in the top 3 of the world. So, but our product is services. We do not have anything else. And is that a problem? I don't think so, because if we look back in the Industrial Revolution, why was the Industrial Revolution? Because people were no longer needed to produce food. One person could produce food for so many. If we now look at the production sites, how many people do you need? Not much. So it's changing to services. And coming back to the previous question, I have my university and I'm in cooperation with maybe 40 other universities all over the world. And I have a 50% trade-off with the Chinese university, and we have one big statement. We never ask people to come to Holland to study there. Only for some weeks, maybe some months, but that's the maximum. Why we do not want them to come and live in Holland? We should bring the knowledge to the countries. So Suriname, Aruba, those are Dutch territories. We go there and we start schools, we start education, we start academic over there. I was in Karaganda. I asked the people, okay, will we start a business school? So you can also be part of all the resources of Kazakhstan. And the next thing they said, well, but when can we come to Holland for our PhD? That was their only important thing. So in my opinion, yes, services is the future, and knowledge should be transported to other countries and stay, and please, talents, stay in the country where you live and help your own people.
Clear enough. Mr. Dr. Akbulut, can you comment from your point of view, please? Could you turn on the mic, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
From the regional development point of view, there has always been a competition for high quality labor force and more capital towards different regions, between different regions. And I think this race can never stop. There is always a competition for better resources and production resources, production factors. And what the regions can do is to find out what are the strengths to make them more prominent, to make them more compatible, to make the region more habitable, more preferable for the people. So only with these priorities, the regions can survive the periods of crisis and maintain better places for the people living in the region. Of course, there will be a more transfer towards the services, but I'm sure there will also be more space for more traditional sectors such as agriculture and other health-related services. Yes, this is what I think.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to Shulpan. Would like to make a comment or a question? Shulpan, please. Well, Shulpan maybe has some difficulties with the connection. Then let me give the floor to Ruslan then.
Good day, dear participants, colleagues. I have one question to Dr. Fatih Abdullah. So, Doctor, may I ask you about what do you think on the issue of new way of thinking in case of the regional policy shaping? And thank you for your attention. Regional policy shaping.
Policy shaping.
Yeah.
Of course. I think regional policies cannot be decided through top to bottom hierarchical structures anymore, because the world has changed through information technologies and more participatory channels. People can now have their say almost on every policy decisions. And now everybody using Twitter or some other social media channels to make their voice heard. I believe that only through more participatory from bottom to top, more transparent and accountable ways of policy making can be successfully implemented at the regional level, which will be beneficial for everybody living in the region. Therefore, this requires a more democratic types of governance structures for the local and regional development. Only this type of administrative structures can produce applicable projects which eventually will be successful.
Thank you, Dr. Akbulut. Nauruz, your turn, please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nauruz. I am from ERI. Thank you to all speakers for your interesting presentation. Before asking a question, I want to suggest to each participant, before answering or asking a questions, let's tell us about how his quarantine was by the title of the film. For example, I felt like I'm living in the Welcome to Zombieland. My question to Professor Jan, do you think that developing economies will continue to support developing countries?
I hope that more and more this help will be there, and on that part, what is a developing country? So on what part is it a developing country? And what we see now, and this is maybe a repetition of what I just said, I see that what we used to do is get all the big talents back to the places where we think they should come. And now we have another problem. In Holland, about 30% of population is non-Dutch native. And this creates cultural problems, this creates many problems. And this also changes democracy. And why does it change democracy? Because people tend to be more, how do you say this, more to one side or the other. And they do not want to help anymore. Before this, Holland was well known in helping every person, helping all the countries. Everybody was welcome. Now it's not. And now they want to cut budgets on development. They want to restrict immigration. So I think we should change that. And we can only change it if all the people do believe that development is necessary, but then development of the regions. After Second World War, we all thought Japan would be a threat because economically they were growing. After some years, we realized that it was beneficial for the whole world. And this now is coming back, I think, believe that we should help others to develop. And in the end, it will help us too. That would be my comment.
Thank you, Professor Witten. Dr. Akbulut would like to comment?
I would like to ask a question to Mr. Perkins.
Please.
Thank you very much for your comments. I read your books and I'm a very big fan of your ideas and opinions, and it's a very great honor for me to be here today with you. Thank you for giving us your time. And I know there are a lot of people in the United States like you who feel themselves trapped in this short-term profit race and become the victim of the way of economy today it is. And I know a lot of people there in the United States, and the voice, the opinions of the United States has effect on the rest of the world. Why do wise people like you can't change the system in the United States? You are not few people. There are many millions like you in the United States. What's keeping them behind? What's holding them back?
It's a great question, and it goes to the heart of this issue of what is a democracy. And the fact of the matter is, the United States is very, very far away from being any sort of a democracy. Although in these most recent elections, we've seen that the voting process seems to be working, one vote for one person. The fact of the matter is, leading up to the election, the people with a lot of money, the ones who own and run the big corporations, have a lot more than one vote. They only get one vote at the voting booth on the voting day. But leading up to that, they spend so much money. They have so much power in impacting the media. They own the media. They really own the media. They either own it outright, which most of the media is owned by very wealthy people, or they own it through their advertising budgets. And so we really don't have a system here, unfortunately, that really reflects the will of the people. I can publish books like, as was mentioned earlier, my books have sold around 2.5 million copies. So what? This is a country, where 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. Why? I can't imagine, frankly, why so many people voted for him. I'm disappointed in that, because I think he's shown himself to be a very selfish, racist individual. But they did. And the influence of money in this country is extremely, extremely strong. So as a writer, as an economist, as someone who who speaks out all the time. And I'm on a lot of radio programs and television and so forth. But I realize that that doesn't compare with the amount of time and money that's put into reaching people through all kinds of forms of communication. That's something I think we really, really need to look at. I believe that as Jan said, that Holland is very high on the happiness index. I suspect a lot of that has to do with the fact that they feel perhaps that they have, individuals have a little bit more of a say in that country. I'm not sure about that, but I think that's one of the things that is important. I think part of the frustration in this country, part of the vote for Trump, was because people feel powerless. We don't feel that we have the right to speak out. I know the world looks at us as having a free press. That has very, very strong limitations as to how free that press is. Yes, I'm free to write and publish what I want, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be distributed. My book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, was on the New York Times for over 70 weeks, and yet the New York Times never reviewed it. They wanted to, but the publisher would stop them because advertisers did not want the book reviewed. That's not really freedom of the press. It's a form of freedom of the press. I could write the book, it got out there, it sold copies, but the New York Times was controlled. And the New York Times is fairly liberal, but it was controlled by the big money interests not to review the book. So I don't know. That's that's just one answer. Is that it's very frustrating, and I appreciate the question. We all need to move in the direction of creating a world where everybody has more ability to speak out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perkins. We are a little beyond the agenda, and I have Sandosh who would like to ask a question, and one more question is coming from the YouTube. I will ask you later. Sandosh, the floor is yours, please. Could you turn it on, microphone, please?
Yes, sure. I would like to thank all the speakers for sharing the knowledge and valuable opinions. I'm a huge fan of Mr. Perkins, and my question is for you. We have national advisors, kind of international advisors for the president, like other countries too, like Tony Blair, who was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and now we have Sir Chakraborty, if I'm not mistaken. What are your kind of recommendations to work with them? Do you think they could make valuable asset for our country, or should we keep them away maybe from the decision making? Or maybe could we have benefits from international advisors for the presidents?
Oh my goodness, that's quite a question. I'm not a political analyst or a person that devises governmental approaches to government. My job, I think, is to try to stir up things to get people to think about these things, which you're obviously doing, and thank you. I think every country has to make its own decisions. The idea of international advisors to somehow help direct a country in the right direction is a little repugnant to me, although I can certainly see the advantages of it at times. And it's especially the case that the fact of the matter is that countries with a lot of economic clout and even military clout do direct the politics of other countries extensively. The United States has something that came out of the early 1800s called the Monroe Doctrine, where President James Monroe of the United States said that the United States has the right to interfere in the politics of any country in our hemisphere, Latin America and the Caribbean, if it threatens the hegemony of the United States. And that doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine, has been invoked many times since. President Kennedy invoked it when he sent troops into the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. Nixon invoked it, and many presidents, including Trump, recently invoked it as an excuse for possibly interfering with the Venezuelan politics. So the fact of the matter is, the United States has had huge amounts of control and power over countries in much of the world, and especially in Latin America. I think that's totally wrong. These countries need to be able to have their own policies and self-determine themselves. I like very much what we heard about Holland from Jan, that the idea of sending experts from our countries to other countries to work with them. But those experts need to understand the other countries. And that's part of the problem. It was always interesting to me that in the 1970s, I spent a lot of time in Iran. And I was working for the Shah, basically. And I thought the Shah was very, very popular. I didn't realize until 1979 that there was a huge undercurrent of resentment and hatred of the Shah, a huge undercurrent, which led to the takeover by the mullahs and the catastrophes that we've seen since. I didn't realize that because I thought I understood the culture. I'd studied it extensively. I was really interested in Iran. I read up, but the only books I read were in English. I didn't speak Farsi. And when I met with people in Iran, I always had a translator, an interpreter. And that interpreter had been to school in the United States or England and worked for the Shah, basically worked for the Shah's government. So I came to understand that I was not getting a clear picture of anything about Iran. I didn't really know Iran, although I thought I did. On the other hand, I went to Latin America and I speak Spanish fluently. And so I could talk to people in the streets. I didn't have to get my information filtered through some interpreter. I think it's very, very important for us all to understand that it's not easy to understand other cultures, and especially where there's other languages. And we have to be very, very careful. And I think I'm not really answering your question because I can't. I don't know the answer to your question. I don't pretend to operate in that field, but it's a very important one to explore. It's particularly important at this time when the new Silk Road is expanding. And I think probably China wants to use the new Silk Road to do what empires have always done, and that is grab more and more resources. But I also think that this whole new Silk Road idea creates a possibility as a concept, not as a Chinese project, but as a concept. If we all will come together around the world and say, yes, we need a new way of communicating with each other. It's not exactly globalization. It's a way of trading. It's a way of using our competitive advantages. It's the way of, as Jan said, to look at countries that don't have any resources like Holland, but is one of the happiest countries and one of the wealthiest countries in the world because it's developed its true competitive advantage, which is the minds of its people and its ability to perform services for others. So, how do we do that? How do we do that without interfering too much with others? These are huge questions. And I think part of our evolution as human beings is to really explore these questions. And so thank you for asking that question. And I don't know how old you are, but I know you're a lot younger than I am. And so I look to you to really delving deep into this. As I go out of the picture, you're coming into the picture. And this is a fascinating subject for you to be exploring. And I'm so glad you're asking this question. And I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer, but you're going to find that answer and share it with the world. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Perkins, it means, yes, Professor Witten.
I was a military man for 17 years. I was a colonel in the army, the Dutch army. And then I go a lot to Moscow. And my colleagues there, they say, do you know in how many countries we are militarily active? And the Russians are only active in 4 countries. Small Holland, only 450 kilometers long, is active in 28 different countries. The United States in 216. So, okay, political advisors, I don't believe in it, exactly for the reason John said, because they do not know the country. But the problem I saw in Kazakhstan was who is taking out all the resources of Kazakhstan? This is Shell, this is Gazprom, This is Tata Steel. And the Kazakh people are not able to work there. They're not able to be the managers there. Why? Because they do not know how a Western company or such a multinational company is managed and what they expect from their people. So there, I think you need people to learn this. And you need education. And then you can take over. At this moment in Suriname, British Petrol is taking out all the oil. And Suriname itself needs only 1.4 billion to assure itself of a future. But they do not have that money and they do not have the people and the resources to do it themselves. So they earn nothing from all the oil which is found. And this, I think, is a difference to political advisors.
Thank you, Professor Zwitten. Just a comment. All the investors are working in Kazakhstan, especially the foreign big ones, facing the conditions from the government that one of the VPs or some of the VPs should be the Kazakh citizen. And also now, since 2000, I think, paying a great attention to educate the employees that are working in the fields of that oil company. So not oil, but, you know, all the big, huge companies working over here. So this is the case, I believe, that needs, you know, quite careful look in terms of, you know, understanding or knowing the situation. But we have obligatory condition that the Kazakh citizens, more than half, should be part of that company that functioning is over here. I'm trying to, you know, fix all the questions as it is becoming more interesting. It was interesting, now is fascinating. And we have Shulpan back. Perhaps she's ready now to ask a question.
Yes, thank you, Nurbek. Sorry for my, I was trying to fix my connection. So I have just one question which is concerning everyone, I guess. So in your opinion, what kind of measures, tools or medical solutions supported China to achieve such a low rate of pandemic? This is an open question for everyone, and thank you.
Thank you, Shulpan. The case of China in terms of fights against the COVID-19 could be quite interesting, as you know, after the spreading out to the world, now they are, you know, kind of becoming a trade partner number one almost for all the countries, you know, earning benefits, I have to say. Perhaps someone would like to share the knowledge about the steps that China has taken towards COVID-19. Perhaps this is the very medical question. What tools they have used?
Well, it's not just medical. I think it's also something to do with culture. I happened to be in China when the pandemic broke out, so I've seen how they handle it. I mean, in Holland, we are talking about a lockdown, and the lockdown in Holland means that people stay at home a little bit more. But basically, we do not care and we meet and we do whatever we want to do. We cannot go to the theater, so we all meet outside. In China, there was a lockdown. Nobody left home. The moment you would leave home, you immediately would be charged by the police or whoever. So they had a real strict policy on this. And this, I haven't seen this in any other country. So I don't know whether it's medical, but on the other hand, my Chinese partner tells me that the numbers are way higher than reported. So I'm not quite sure that it is completely out. This is what I know about it.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Perkins would like to add something?
Well, coming from the country that's at the opposite end of the spectrum from China in just about every way, incidentally, you know, we have this idea here that we have freedom. Yeah, I come from the state of New Hampshire, and the motto of that state is live free or die. You know, And if you go back to the 1700s, it may have made some sense, but it doesn't anymore. China, on the other hand, has the Confucian philosophy of we listen to the boss, we listen to the father figure, we listen to the person in control, and we obey the rules. And as Jan said, I don't know what the real numbers are in China, but I suspect they're pretty low regardless. They may not be as low as China says, but I suspect they're pretty low. We've had this terrible situation in the United States where people they refuse to obey what all the science tells them, what all the medical authorities tell them, wear masks, social distance, and I'm doing it, and there's a number of people are doing it, but our own president has defied those recommendations. And so I would go back and say, Chopin, that I think, China seems to have really evolved into a situation where they listen to the science, or maybe they just listen to the leader. And as we said earlier, whether you're talking about a democracy or a dictatorship, ultimately what it comes down to is the person in charge. And it seems as though China has been listening to the person in charge and taking that very seriously, and it's helped them a lot. And in the United States, way too many people have listened to our person in charge, who is not listening to all the best advice he's been receiving from the scientists and the medical authorities. So I think that really defines the difference is how closely, in this case, do you follow science? And the Chinese seem to be following science, and the Americans are not following science. And I think those are two extremes in the spectrum, and then everybody else lies someplace along that spectrum. As Jan said, in Holland, they're also not listening to the science necessarily as much, and we've seen that in Germany. We've seen that increasingly in so many countries around the world. But those that do listen to the science seem to be doing much better than those that don't.
Thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. It leads me to Dr. Dolores with the question, as long as the isolation is concerned, there is a question from the YouTube about the transformation of international trade in face of isolation challenges. There is a question, do we need to start over? For example, with the trade rules or with the approaches, with the WTO obligations, etc., having in mind the lockdowns, etc.?
Oh, thank you for questions. And as for me, I think it's not extremely essential to nullify all of agreements, because nowadays we have well-built agreements and based on international cooperation, extremely effectiveness, but as our experience during pandemic coronavirus shown, it's not so sufficiently, it's not so effectiveness. That's why, in my point of view, I think it's no needless to change or nullify the ideas, but we can just review some obligatories and some our agreements in existing international system of world cooperation. Because as we saw during this pandemic, it was closed every borders, and it wasn't export and import between countries, and no any help and support in sometimes. And that's why I think in the forefront put the national benefits of countries. We will be oriented on our national, our own benefits and goals of our countries and every country's view. I think so in this way. But anyway, integrational processes will stay, but not so faster as before. But I think they will stay, but in new, maybe some modern forms and structure. We will review it, our previous agreements. In new stage, we will go, I think, in international platform of cooperation.
Thank you, Dolores. Ladies and gentlemen, our honored speakers. Let me conclude then our webinar. And this is clear that the coronavirus disease continues to spread across the world, with the second wave following a trajectory that is difficult to predict. The health, humanitarian, and social economic policies adopted by the countries, of course, will determine the speed and strength of the recovery. Although it is difficult to determine the exact impact that the coronavirus will have on the world's economy. It is clear, of course, the impact will be substantial and pervasive. And it appears to me that the worst yet to come. And the steps that are being taken or discussions are being held are crucial these days in order to find out which way would be beneficial for the nations of our countries. The current forecast call for international flows to start growing again as the pandemic comes under control, but no one knows when it comes to under control. Thus, coming to 2020, which is likely to be a low point for many globalization metrics. But how deep will the plunge really be? How fast can we expect global flows to rebound? And how might the future flow patterns look different from the past, as Mr. Patton said? None of these questions can be answered definitely yet. And that's why today's discussions were so important in terms of exchanging the views and the experiences. I just would like to quote one of the professors of the Oxford University who said that no wall will be high enough to safeguard the future of citizens from the future threats without cooperation with other countries. So discussions, cooperations, mutual understanding between us would be the key point in order to ensure the future for our generations. Ladies and gentlemen, let me thank again for joining us. Today we had a very unique experience of having this webinar starting from the United States of America, Europe and Kazakhstan, so many time differences and so many great and very interesting point of views we have heard today. Hopefully, the pandemic-19 will end up as it has been always in our histories. All the pandemic will finish up soon enough. I would like to wish you all good health, take care, keep safe, and let's see each other in the nearest future. Thank you very much again. If you have, Mr. Perkins, yes, please. Just, thank you very much.
Thank you and goodbye. Thank you. It's been
Thank
wonderful.
you and goodbye. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thanks.